Step out of the photo. For a second, I thought I'd misheard my father. 23 people were crowded into the living room at Bennett Ridge Farm, still warm from Thanksgiving dinner. My mother was straightening collars. My aunt was trying to make two cousins stop arguing over who had to kneel in front. Someone had moved the coffee table against the wall, and the photographer was backing toward the fireplace, telling everyone to squeeze closer. My sister Chloe stood between my parents. Of course she did. She had one arm linked through Mom's and the other tucked around Dad's waist, wearing the cream sweater Mom had spent 10 minutes admiring before dinner. Dad pointed past the camera. I said, "Step out, Mara." The room quieted by degrees. First the cousins, then my aunt. Then even the children seemed to notice something had changed. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wineglass. "Excuse me?" Mom answered for him. "We don't want people seeing the picture and thinking you're still part of this family. There are sentences so cruel your body understands them before your mind does." My tongue went dry. The glass felt suddenly too cold between my fingers. I looked at my mother, waiting for the smallest sign that she knew how insane that sounded. There wasn't one. Then I looked at Chloe. Her mouth curved. Not a laugh. Worse. A tiny, satisfied smile from someone who had spent her entire life knowing there would always be room for her because I was the one expected to move. A few hours earlier, I had refused to sign a veterinary statement for horses I had never examined. Apparently, that was enough to erase 39 years. Normally, I would have explained myself. I would have reminded Dad how many midnight calls I had answered from that farm, how many records I had cleaned up, how many times I had reviewed Chloe's sales packets for free because we're family. I would have tried to make everyone understand that refusing to certify something I hadn't personally verified wasn't betrayal. It was my job. Instead, I lifted my glass. I faced my parents, then Chloe, and smiled. "Congratulations," I said. "You just got your wish." I took one slow sip, set the glass on the mantel, picked up my coat, and walked out before anybody could turn my humiliation into another discussion about my attitude. 48 hours later, my parents were standing outside my door. Dad had a document in his hand. Mom looked like she hadn't slept, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Mara, please, we need you to sign this." I looked down at the paper, then back at my father. "You said I wasn't family." His jaw tightened. "This is different." It was, because the signature they suddenly needed wasn't from their daughter. It was from Dr. Mara Bennett. And when I finally saw what they had been telling buyers in my name, I understood something that hurt far more than being pushed out of a photograph. My family had been perfectly willing to erase me. They just hadn't expected me to take my credibility with me. But to understand how we got there, you need to know what happened before Dad told me to step out of that picture. Earlier that Thanksgiving afternoon, Chloe had cornered me in the kitchen while I was cutting twine from a bundle of rosemary. Mom had recruited everyone into some holiday task the second we arrived, although everyone mostly meant me. Chloe had spent the morning greeting relatives and showing them videos of the yearlings. I had peeled potatoes. Some traditions survive because nobody ever asks who benefits from them. "Mara?" I looked over my shoulder. Chloe held a glossy folder against her chest. "What? Can you look at something?" There it was. The Bennett family version of "Please." "Can you look at something? Can you check something? Can you call someone? Can you fix this?" I wiped my hands on a towel. "I'm making the gravy in 10 minutes. It'll take 30 seconds. It never took 30 seconds. She opened the folder on the kitchen island. The cover showed 3 horses running across our east pasture at sunset beneath the Bennett Ridge Farm logo. I had to admit it looked beautiful. Chloe was good at that. She knew how to take something ordinary and make it look like people should want to belong to it. Inside was a sales packet for 6 horses being considered by Caroline Whitaker, who ran a breeding operation several states away. I skimmed the first page. Bloodlines, training history, breeding records. Then I hit the veterinary section. My eyes stopped. Veterinary oversight provided through Bennett Equine Veterinary Services. I read it again. What is this? Chloe glanced at the page. The health section. I can see that, she said. Then what's the problem? I tapped the sentence. This. Oh, come on. No. Seriously. What does this mean? It means exactly what it says. That my practice oversees your veterinary program? She gave me the look she had used since we were teenagers, whenever I turned something she considered simple into something inconvenient. You are our vet. No, I'm a vet who has treated some of your horses. Mara, I've handled emergencies. I've done reproductive exams. I've looked at pre-sale records when you asked me to. That is not the same thing as ongoing oversight of the entire program. Chloe lowered her voice. You know what buyers mean when they read that? Yes, I said. That's exactly the problem. Dad walked in carrying a tray of empty glasses. What problem? Chloe answered before I could. She's doing the wording thing again. Dad put the tray down. The wording thing. That was what my family called it whenever precision cost them something. I'm not doing a thing, I said. I'm telling Chloe not to represent my clinic as supervising horses I haven't examined. Dad looked at the packet, barely reading the line. Oh, for God's sake. That's your response? Everybody knows you work with the farm. Working with the farm isn't the same as being responsible for the whole program. Dad picked up one of the glasses and examined a water spot as if it deserved more attention than I did. Don't make everything so formal. A familiar pressure formed between my ribs. That sentence had been following me most of my adult life. When I wanted repayment terms after lending Chloe money at 26, I was making things formal. When I wanted Mom to tell me before volunteering my clinic for a charity event, I was making things formal. When I asked Dad to stop telling buyers I could take a quick look at horses on Sundays, I was making things formal. Funny how the person giving something away was always the one accused of making it complicated. Chloe pushed another sheet toward me. Fine. Forget the brochure. Just sign this. It was a health statement. I scanned the horse names. My eyes stopped halfway down. I haven't examined Hawthorne Bell since March. She's fine. That isn't what I said. Her records are there. I haven't examined Copper Ridge at all. Dr. Freeman did. Then Dr. Freeman can certify what Dr. Freeman observed. Chloe's shoulders dropped. Caroline wants the packet tonight. Then you should have asked me before tonight. Dad's expression hardened. Mara, it's Thanksgiving. Yes. So maybe don't turn dinner into a board meeting. I stared at him. I had not brought the packet into the kitchen. I had not invented the deadline. I had not written my clinic's name on the brochure. And somehow I was the one turning Thanksgiving into business. I slid the statement back toward Chloe. If I didn't examine it, I don't certify it. Dad gave a short laugh. Your sister needs help. She needs accurate paperwork. She needs family. There it was. Not love. Not trust. Not respect. Family. Used as a verb. Something I was expected to perform. Chloe's face tightened. You know what? Forget it. She snatched up the folder. Good. I said forget it, not act smug. I'm not acting smug. You always act like you're the only competent person in the room. That one landed closer to bone. Because Chloe wasn't completely wrong. When you spend your life being called difficult every time you notice a problem, competence can become armor. I opened my mouth to defend myself. Then stopped. Dad had already turned away. Conversation over. Decision made. My refusal had been filed under Mara being Mara. 3 hours later, he ordered me out of the family photograph. On the drive home, I kept hearing Mom's voice. We don't want people thinking you're still part of this family. My headlights swept across black fences and empty fields. I gripped the steering wheel harder than I needed to. When I was 10, Chloe had fallen off the low stone wall behind our house and split her knee open. Mom carried her inside. Dad brought ice. I stood in the doorway holding Chloe's muddy shoes. Nobody told me to. I just knew someone had to. That became my role so gradually I didn't recognize it as one. Chloe needed reassurance. Mara could handle herself. Chloe needed another chance. Mara understood consequences. Chloe was sensitive. Mara was strong. People think strong is always a compliment. Sometimes it's permission. Permission to forget you need anything. Permission to expect more. Permission to assume that because you survived yesterday, you can carry tomorrow too. By the time I reached my house, anger had replaced humiliation. That helped. Anger gave me something to do. I took off my coat, put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and made tea I never drank. For 20 minutes, I told myself I wasn't checking the phone. Then I checked it. No apology from Dad. No apology from Mom. One message from Diane Bennett, sent at 10:42 p.m. When you calm down, we'll talk. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Not I'm sorry. Not, your father shouldn't have said that. Not even, did you get home safely? When you calm down. Meaning the problem was not what they had done. The problem was my reaction. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, I am calm. Deleted it. Typed, there is nothing to discuss until Dad apologizes. Deleted that too. Because I knew exactly what would happen. Mom would call. I would explain. She would sigh. I would explain better. She would say Chloe had been stressed. I would explain again. Eventually, I would be apologizing for my tone while nobody remembered what Dad had actually said. I set the phone down. For once, I let silence do something other than punish me. Friday morning, Bennett Equine Veterinary Services was quieter than usual. Most routine appointments had been cleared for the holiday weekend, leaving only scheduled checks and emergencies. At 8:15, I was reviewing notes written by one of our younger associates. I circled a sentence. Horse remains under continuous veterinary supervision. When he came into my office, I pointed to it. Were you supervising this horse continuously? No. I examined him Tuesday. Then write that. He nodded. Owner said their regular vet had been following him. Then their regular vet can document that part. He changed the note. I leaned back in my chair. If you didn't observe it, don't own it. Nathan Cole, who had stopped in to discuss a referral before heading to his own calls, heard me from the doorway. You planning to put that on a mug? Maybe. He smiled. Nathan had known me long enough to recognize when a joke was doing more work than it looked like. You okay? Fine. He waited. Family Thanksgiving. Ah. That was all he said. One of the reasons I liked Nathan was that he didn't treat silence like a problem he had to fix. My phone buzzed. For one stupid second, hope jumped. It wasn't Mom. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered. Bennett Equine Veterinary Services. This is Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett? Caroline Whitaker. I sat straighter. I believe my sister mentioned you. Yes. I'm reviewing the Bennett Ridge package. My stomach tightened. All right. I just wanted to confirm something before we move forward. Nathan glanced at me, noticed my expression, and quietly stepped out. Caroline continued. The packet says Bennett Equine provides veterinary oversight for the farm's breeding program. I wanted to clarify what that includes. I looked at the wall across from my desk. There was no dramatic sound. No alarm. Just the faint ticking of the clock above my filing cabinet. Can you tell me exactly what document you're looking at? There was a pause. The sales packet Chloe Bennett sent yesterday. Would you mind emailing me the page? Of course. I chose each word carefully. I can confirm services my practice actually performed. I can't confirm oversight of a program I did not oversee. Silence. Not angry silence. Thinking silence. Finally, Caroline said, That's helpful. Helpful. Not reassuring. A minute later, the email arrived. I opened the attachment. Same horses. Same photographs. Same glossy branding. But this version was slightly different from the one Chloe had shown me. At the bottom of the veterinary page was the Bennett Equine logo. My logo. Underneath it, continuous veterinary oversight provided by Bennett Equine Veterinary Services. My pulse kicked once. Hard. I zoomed in as if the words might change. They didn't. The photograph from Thanksgiving had hurt. This scared me, because being pushed out of a family picture could humiliate me. This could attach my professional name to work I had never done. I saved the PDF into a separate folder. Then I opened my clinic calendar. That afternoon, I began checking dates. I told myself I was only verifying facts, but underneath that was another question. How long? How long had they been saying this? Saturday morning, someone knocked on my front door before 8. 3 sharp knocks. Then 2 more. I already knew. Dad always knocked like the door had disappointed him personally. I opened it but left the chain latched. Mom stood beside him in a camel-colored coat, holding her handbag with both hands. Dad had a folder. For the first time since Thanksgiving, neither of them looked angry. They looked worried. Mara, Mom said. Please. I glanced at Dad. He raised the folder. We need 10 minutes. You have 5. His eyebrows lifted. I almost apologized. Almost. Then remembered standing outside the family photograph. I unlatched the door. Dad walked straight to my dining table, as though he still had the right to enter any room I occupied and make it his. Mom followed. He took out a one-page statement. Caroline's holding the deposit until she gets clarification. I read it. It was written broadly enough to suggest that I had reviewed the veterinary condition and management of the entire sale group. I put it down. I can't sign this. Mom closed her eyes. Mara, I haven't examined all of these horses. You know them. That isn't the same thing. Dad planted both hands on my table. They're healthy. Then the veterinarians who examined them can say that. We don't have time to track everybody down. I looked at him. That sentence told me more than he realized. Not that the horses were unhealthy. Not that something terrible had happened. Only that accuracy had become inconvenient. Mom stepped closer. We're family. We can't let one ugly dinner ruin everything. I felt something inside me go very still. You said I wasn't family. Dad's jaw tightened. This is different. Why? Because this is business. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the answer was so clean. Family when they needed obedience. Business when I needed boundaries. I slid the statement back. Why does Caroline think I oversee the entire program? Dad's eyes flicked toward Mom. There. A tiny movement. But I saw it. Mara, nobody lied to anybody. That isn't what I asked. The brochure language is standard. According to whom? Don't start interrogating me in your own house. My own house is exactly where I'm allowed to ask questions. Mom whispered my name like I had embarrassed her. Dad pushed the paper closer again. Just sign what you've always done. My fingers rested against the edge. For years, that sentence would have worked. Because he was right about one thing. I had always done it. Not this exact document. But the pattern. Fix it. Smooth it over. Make the call. Check the record. Handle the emergency. Keep Chloe from looking incompetent. Keep Dad from losing money. Keep Mom from becoming upset. Keep the family moving. I picked up the document. Dad relaxed. Then I folded it once. And handed it back to him. No. His face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The confidence disappeared first. Mom stared at me. Mara, what are you doing? Something I should have done years ago. But I wasn't ready to say that yet. After they left, I went back to my computer. Caroline's PDF was still open. I zoomed to the bottom again. My clinic logo. My practice name. The words continuous veterinary oversight. I stared until the humiliation of Thanksgiving rearranged itself in my head. The photograph had not started this. The photograph had been punishment. For the first time, I stopped asking why my family had pushed me out of the picture, and started asking how long they had been using my name after I left the room. The question stayed with me long after my parents left. How long? Not how long had Dad expected me to help. I already knew the answer to that. Years. The question was how long Bennett Ridge had been presenting my professional involvement as something broader than it really was. There was a difference between answering Chloe's call at 10 at night because a mare was showing signs of distress and being responsible for the veterinary program of an entire breeding operation. There was a difference between performing a reproductive exam and certifying every claim made about that horse months later. My parents had spent years blurring those differences whenever precision became inconvenient. That Saturday morning, I stopped letting them blur anything. The dining table still smelled faintly of Dad's aftershave after he and Mom left. The unsigned statement sat where he had pushed it toward me, one corner hanging over the edge. I photographed the document before slipping it into an envelope. Not because I thought it was evidence of some grand conspiracy. Because it had been handed to me, and because I was finally learning not to trust myself to remember every detail after somebody spent 3 days telling me I had misunderstood it. Then I opened my laptop. The first thing on the screen was Caroline Whitaker's packet. The Bennett Equine logo looked almost absurdly familiar. I had approved that logo myself 4 years earlier after paying a local designer more than I should have, because I wanted my practice to look established instead of improvised. My name was part of that business. My reputation was part of it. So I started with the only thing I could control: facts. The clinic software showed every service Bennett Equine had provided to Bennett Ridge Farm. I searched by account. The screen filled with years of visits, vaccinations, pregnancy checks, lameness examinations, emergency calls, pre-purchase evaluations, reproductive work, routine follow-ups. There was a lot. More than I expected, even though I had performed much of it myself. But volume was not the same thing as scope. One by one, I compared the 6 horses in Caroline's current sales packet against our records. Hawthorne Bell had last been examined by me in early spring. Copper Ridge had never been my patient. Dr. Freeman had handled him through another practice. 2 mares had routine vaccination records through us, but nothing that would justify the phrase continuous oversight. 1 yearling had been seen by Nathan during an emergency when I was out of town. Only 1 horse in the group had been under recent care directly connected to me. I leaned back. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. 6 horses. 1 recent direct relationship. Yet the brochure made my clinic sound like the professional umbrella over all of them. Maybe Grant believed that was close enough. Maybe Chloe did too. But I had spent too many years dealing with clients who remembered the sentence they wanted instead of the sentence a veterinarian actually said. Close enough was how misunderstandings became somebody else's liability. A notification appeared on my phone. Chloe. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. Then I answered. What? Seriously? Her voice was already tight. I said hello yesterday. You walked out yesterday, after Dad threw me out of a photograph. He didn't throw you out of the house. The distinction was so ridiculous I nearly laughed. Is that what we're measuring now? Mara, Caroline is holding everything. That's between Caroline and Bennett Ridge. It became your business when you refused to confirm something everybody already knows. My hand stopped over the keyboard. What exactly does everybody know? That you handle the farm. No, I handle specific cases. You're doing it again. Doing what? Turning one sentence into some ethical crisis. There it was again. Wording, details, technicalities. For most of my life, people in that house had used those words as if accuracy were a personality defect. The screen in front of me showed Copper Ridge's empty clinic history. Did you put my practice name in the brochure? A pause came through the phone. Not long. Long enough. I manage marketing. That wasn't my question. You approved the logo. For my clinic. And your clinic works with the farm. Did you put the sentence there? Chloe exhaled hard. Dad approved the packet. That answer could mean almost anything. She could have been shifting blame. She could have been telling me exactly what happened. At that point, I had no way to know. So you did write it. Mara, why are you trying to make me the criminal here? I didn't call you anything. You don't have to. You do that thing where you ask the same question 6 ways until somebody sounds guilty. My jaw tightened. Years ago, that accusation would have been enough to make me back off. Not because it was true, because I hated the possibility that it might be. I'm asking who authorized my business name to be used that way. Dad's been using that line longer than I've been doing the packets. Everything in me went still. What did you say? I said this isn't new. How long? I don't know. You just said Dad has been using it. Because he has. Since when? For years, maybe. God, Mara. I don't keep an archaeological record of every brochure this place has ever printed. That sounded like Chloe. I could picture the impatient flick of her hand even though I couldn't see her. What I do know, she continued, is you have always helped us. Helping. The word had become elastic enough to cover anything. How many of Caroline's horses have I examined recently? That's not the point. It is exactly the point. They're healthy. That's still not the point. You know what? Chloe said. Sometimes I think you enjoy making us need you. That one hit hard enough to keep me quiet. Not because I believed it. Because some part of me had spent years terrified that everybody else did. Then she added, You got out, Mara. You got your clinic, your degrees, your whole big life. This farm is the one thing I have. The anger in me loosened slightly. Chloe had stayed. That was true. She had worked on the farm through bad seasons, difficult births, long summer days and winters that made the pipes freeze. She knew horses. She knew buyers. She knew how to sell a yearling without making the conversation sound like a transaction. None of that changed what was happening. I'm not trying to take the farm from you. Then stop acting like you're the only one allowed to decide how we run it. My name is not part of how you run it. Another pause. Smaller this time. You really want Dad to lose this deal? There it was. The handoff. From facts to consequences. If the paperwork was wrong, I was hurting the business by correcting it. If Grant lost money, I was responsible because I refused to save him from losing it. I want you to stop using my clinic to say something my clinic didn't do. Same thing right now. No, I said. That's the problem. You think they're the same thing. She hung up. I set the phone beside the laptop. Dad's been using that line longer than I've been doing the packets. The photograph hurt. The brochure scared me. That sentence changed the shape of the problem. Until then, there had still been a convenient explanation available. Chloe handled marketing. Chloe had gone too far. Chloe had written something sloppy because she knew I would complain and eventually fix it anyway. But if the wording existed before Chloe took over those materials, then I had been looking at the wrong beginning. I spent the next hour going through old clinic emails. Search terms first. Bennett Ridge. Sales packet. Veterinary oversight. Health statement. Most results were ordinary. Invoices. Appointment requests. Photos of swollen joints, sent without context. Messages from Dad consisting of things like, "Can you swing by?" Messages from Chloe asking, "Quick question." That phrase alone produced an uncomfortable number of results. Quick question. Can you take a look at this? Does this seem normal? What would you put here? Can you call when you get a minute? Each one had seemed small at the time. That was how it worked. Nobody had ever sat me down and said, "Mara, we expect you to provide years of unpaid professional support while Chloe receives the authority and recognition." They didn't need to. They asked for 10 minutes, then 20, then an evening, then a weekend, then another favor because I had already done the last one. A text from 3 years earlier made me stop. Chloe had sent a picture of a yearling's leg, late on a Sunday evening. "Can you look at this quick? Dad doesn't want to pay an emergency call if it's nothing." My reply had been immediate. Hard to assess from a photo. "Keep him quiet and call the on-call service if swelling increases or he won't bear weight. I can see him tomorrow." The next message came from Dad. "Thanks. Knew we could count on you." I had not billed that conversation. Another message 6 months later. "Need wording cleaned up on a sales sheet. 5 mins tops." Then, "Can you check Chloe's health section before dinner?" Then, "Buyer has questions. Easier if you call him." One incident was a favor. A dozen were a habit. Years of them were infrastructure. I stared at the screen until that word settled. Infrastructure. Something the farm depended on without ever admitting it existed. My clinic had carried part of Bennett Ridge's professional workload so quietly that nobody, including me, had ever put a price beside it. That afternoon, Caroline emailed again. The subject line read, "Older packet." Her message was brief. "Dr. Bennett, a colleague purchased from Bennett Ridge last year." I asked whether her materials used the same language. She forwarded the attached packet to me and said I could send it along. Thought it might help clarify what I was looking at. I opened the attachment. Different horses. Different photographs. Same farm branding. Halfway down the page, my stomach tightened. Veterinary oversight provided through Bennett Equine Veterinary Services. Not continuous that time, but close enough to create the same impression. I checked the date. Almost 11 months earlier. A year. At least. The file properties meant nothing to me beyond what the document showed, and I wasn't going to pretend they did. But the packet itself had been received by a buyer. That mattered. A single badly chosen sentence could be a mistake. 2 sales packets nearly a year apart looked like a practice. My phone buzzed again. "Mom." This time she didn't call. "Are you at the clinic?" I left it unanswered. 5 minutes later. "I'm coming by." Of course she was. By the time Diane Bennett walked through the front entrance, I had moved from the reception desk to an exam room. She carried a covered casserole dish. The sight of it almost broke through my anger. My mother never arrived empty-handed after a fight. Food was her favorite form of apology, because food never had to admit what it had done. "I brought turkey tetrazzini," she said. "Thank you." Her eyes moved over me. You look exhausted. I'm working. You've always worked too much. The irony was impressive. She set the dish on the counter. For about 30 seconds, neither of us mentioned Dad, Chloe, Thanksgiving, or the document. Then Mom said, "There's a problem with Magnolia." I straightened immediately. "What kind of problem?" "She needs you." "What happened?" "Your father said she seemed off." Off. One of the most useless words in veterinary medicine. Eating? I think so. Walking normally? I don't know. Temperature? Mara, I don't know. Your father asked me to come get you. Is she colicking? I said I don't know. That was when something about the conversation shifted. Dad owned horses. Chloe had spent her adult life around them. If Magnolia were showing signs that genuinely frightened either of them, Mom would have arrived with more than she seems off. What does Dad actually need? Her mouth tightened. Mara. What? The paperwork has to go out today. I looked at her. There was no veterinary emergency. There was a deadline. Magnolia isn't sick. I didn't say she was sick. You said there was a problem with her. There is. Her paperwork isn't complete because you won't sign. For several seconds, only the fluorescent hum above us filled the room. Something in me settled. Not anger. Clarity. That isn't an emergency. Your father has people waiting. Then he has a paperwork problem. Why are you being like this? Like what? So rigid. I folded my arms. She stepped closer. Your father is under enormous pressure. Then he needs accurate documents. He needs his daughter. The sentence should have hurt more than it did. Instead, Thanksgiving came back with almost photographic sharpness. Dad pointing away from the camera. Mom telling me they didn't want people thinking I was still part of the family. You already decided whether I was his daughter when I became inconvenient. Her face changed. That was said in anger. You said it too. We were upset. So was I. Then, why are we still doing this? Because you are still asking for the same thing. I didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the counter and picked up one of the clinic business cards. From now on, if Bennett Ridge needs veterinary services, call the clinic. Mom blinked. What? Appointments, record reviews, examinations, paperwork. Call the office. This is ridiculous. No more texts to my personal number, asking for quick opinions. No more bringing sales forms to dinner. No more. Just look at this. You're going to make your own father schedule appointments with you? Yes. Her lips parted. That single word seemed more offensive to her than anything I had said all weekend. You charge strangers. I charge clients. We are not clients. Then stop asking for professional services. Her eyes hardened. Mara, you are punishing us. No. I am separating two things you keep insisting are the same. What two things? Being your daughter and being your veterinarian. Mom stared at me. For once, I didn't rush to fill the space. She picked up her purse. The casserole remained on the counter. At the door, she turned. You're going to regret making this so ugly. Maybe. That possibility followed me long after she left. Boundaries sound clean when people talk about them after the fact. In real life, they can make you feel mean, petty, ungrateful. Standing alone in that exam room, part of me wanted to chase Mom down the hall and soften everything. Tell her the farm could still call in a genuine emergency. Tell her I wasn't abandoning anybody. Tell her this was about business, not love. Then another part of me asked why I was always responsible for making my boundaries comfortable for the people who kept crossing them. I let her leave. The casserole sat untouched until one of the technicians asked whether she could put it in the refrigerator. Please do. Back in my office, the old packet from Caroline remained open beside the current one. Same implication. Different year. Dad's been using that line longer than I've been doing the packets. Chloe's voice replayed. There was one obvious thing left to check. Had I ever addressed that language before? Search. Oversight. Brochure. Approve. My inbox returned hundreds of unrelated results. I narrowed the date range. Then one subject line caught my eye. Website veterinary wording. 7 months earlier. From Chloe. The message was casual. Hey, can we say every horse at the farm is under your veterinary oversight? Dad thinks it reassures buyers. I had forgotten the email completely. My reply came 19 minutes later. No, please don't use that wording. Bennett Equine can be listed for specific veterinary services we actually provide. For sales material, use veterinary records available on request, unless I directly examine the horse for that sale. I don't provide blanket oversight of the farm's entire program. My skin prickled. There it was. Not memory. Not interpretation. Not a fight reconstructed after the fact. A sentence. A date. A boundary. Chloe had replied 2 minutes later. Okay. That one word made me sit back. She had known. Not in some vague moral sense. She had asked. I had answered. She had acknowledged it. Yet the current packet still carried broader language. The anger came quickly this time. For several seconds, Chloe became the simplest answer. Of course. She ran marketing. She wanted the deal. She had spent Thanksgiving standing between Mom and Dad while I was pushed out of the frame. Maybe Dad had simply trusted whatever she put in front of him. Maybe the whole thing really did start with her. Then I noticed something beneath her reply. A small line in the email header I had ignored 7 months earlier. Forwarded message. My hand tightened around the mouse. I expanded the thread. Chloe had forwarded my response less than 5 minutes after receiving it. Recipient: Grant Bennett. No additional explanation. No argument. Just my answer. My exact words. My father had not merely heard months later that I disliked the wording. He had been sent the boundary itself. I read the thread again. Then a third time. The office around me seemed strangely distant. Chloe had known, but for the first time, I could see that my father had known too. My father had been sent the boundary itself. Not a summary. Not Chloe's interpretation. My exact words. Please don't use that wording. I don't provide blanket oversight of the farm's entire program. 7 months earlier, Grant Bennett had received that message and apparently decided it did not apply to him. For a while, I sat in my office staring at the forwarded header. The anger was different now. Thanksgiving had been hot and immediate, Dad pointing toward the edge of the room. Mom telling me they didn't want anyone mistaking me for part of the family, Chloe standing between them. That anger had bruised. This one sharpened. Because there was something almost comforting about believing people had misunderstood you. Misunderstanding leaves room for explanation. This didn't. I saved the email thread into the same folder as Caroline's packets, then printed a copy and wrote the date across the top. Not because paper made it more true. Because I had spent most of my life allowing conversations with my parents to become foggy once enough time passed. Dad would remember saying something slightly different. Mom would remember the tone instead of the words. Chloe would remember what she thought I meant. Eventually, I would start wondering whether my own memory had been unfair. A dated email didn't care who was upset. It simply remained. The next morning, Chloe called before I could decide whether I wanted to call her. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked. No hello. No Thanksgiving. No apology. Where the wording came from. "Mara, we've already been through this." "No. We established that you knew I objected to it. You're making it sound like I forged your signature." "I haven't accused you of forging anything." "Then what do you want from me?" The first packet where that language appeared. She exhaled. "I don't have every old brochure. You told me Dad had been using the line before you handled marketing." "He did." "How do you know?" "Because when I took over the sales materials, I used the old ones as templates." That was concrete. "Do you still have them?" A pause. "Maybe." "Can you send them?" "Why?" "Because my business name is on them." "You're really going to audit Dad's brochures now?" The word audit came out like an insult. "Do you have the file or not?" Another silence. Then, quieter. "Give me a minute." The call ended. 9 minutes later, an email arrived. 3 attachments. The oldest was a draft from nearly 3 years earlier. The formatting looked clumsy compared with Chloe's newer work. The farm logo was too large. Horse photographs had uneven margins. A paragraph about bloodlines stretched almost to the bottom of the page. Then I reached the veterinary section. There it was. Veterinary oversight provided through Bennett Equine Veterinary Services. The same sentence. Almost word for word. My hand went still on the mouse. The document had review comments preserved in the margin. One came from Grant Bennett. "Keep Bennett Equine in. Buyers like knowing Mara is behind the program." Behind the program. I read it twice. Then once more. 3 years ago, Dad had not accidentally assumed my clinic name belonged there. He had made a sales decision. My name reassured buyers. My qualifications added value. My presence made the farm look professionally supported. And apparently that had been enough. Whether I actually supervised the program was secondary. The sentence on the screen was not dramatic. That made it worse. No threats. No elaborate scheme. Just a practical note from a businessman deciding which asset made the brochure stronger. Except the asset was me. My phone rang. Chloe. Did you get it? Yes. Then you can see I didn't invent the sentence. No. The relief in her voice came too quickly. Exactly. That doesn't clear you. Her breath caught. What? You knew I told you not to use it 7 months ago. Dad said it was fine, and you kept using it. He owns the farm. He doesn't own my clinic. For God's sake, Mara, nobody thinks he owns your clinic. Then why does his brochure get to make claims about it? She said nothing. The question hung between us. That was the first moment the argument stopped being about whether I was difficult. There was nowhere easy to move it. Chloe finally said, "Talk to Dad." "I will. And leave me out of it." "No." "What does that mean?" "It means you don't get to send me the old draft, prove you inherited the wording, and pretend that everything after that happened without you." Her voice hardened. "I was trying to help you." "You were helping yourself." "That's unfair." "So is using a boundary you acknowledged as optional because Dad told you it was." She hung up. This time, I didn't call back. The easiest story would have been that Chloe had done all of it. The spoiled younger sister. The golden child. The woman in the center of the photograph who had smiled when I was pushed out. That story would have fit my anger beautifully. But the old draft ruined it. Chloe had benefited. She had continued the wording after I told her not to. She was responsible for that. But the sentence had existed before her. Dad had not inherited the problem from Chloe. Chloe had inherited it from Dad. That realization hurt in a place Thanksgiving had not reached. For years, part of me had believed my father simply found me exhausting. Too cautious. Too precise. Too unwilling to say yes quickly. Maybe he didn't understand why details mattered. Maybe he came from a generation where business happened with handshakes and people trusted each other. Maybe he saw my insistence on scope and documentation as unnecessary because he did not understand my profession. The comment in the draft took that excuse away. He understood my name mattered. That was why he kept it. The question was whether he understood my no. 7 months earlier, he had received that too. By noon, I was standing behind my desk, with the phone pressed to my ear. Dad answered on the 4th ring. "What?" "I found the old sales packet." No greeting from him either. "What old packet?" "The one with your comment about keeping Bennett Equine in because buyers liked knowing I was behind the program." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "So?" The simplicity of it almost knocked the argument out of me. "So you knew that wording was being used?" "Of course I knew." "And 7 months ago, Chloe forwarded you my email, telling her not to use blanket oversight language. You sent an email about wording. I said I did not oversee the entire program." "Mara, you are twisting this into something it isn't." "What is it then?" "A brochure. With my business name. A business that has worked with this farm for years. On specific cases." He gave a frustrated sigh. "There you go again." "Again what?" Acting like every sentence is a deposition. There was an old instinct in me that wanted to lower my voice. Make the question softer. Give him an exit. Instead, I asked it plainly. "Did you know I told Chloe not to use that wording?" "I knew you were being difficult about wording." My eyes closed for half a second. There it was. Not misunderstanding. Not ignorance. He knew. He just disagreed with my right to decide. "That isn't what I asked." "I heard what you asked." "Then answer it." "I just did." "No. You described my behavior. Did you know I said no?" Another pause. When he spoke, his voice dropped. "I knew you didn't like the phrase." "That means, yes." "Don't put words in my mouth." "I don't have to. I have the email." His breathing changed on the other end. "Mara, listen to yourself." "I am." "You're going through years of paperwork because your feelings got hurt at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is why I stopped ignoring this. It isn't why this exists. You walked out. The sentence landed so strangely that for a second I thought I had misunderstood. You told me to get out of the picture. And then you made a scene. I raised a glass and left. You embarrassed your mother. You told me I wasn't part of the family. That isn't what I said. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not because anything was funny, because the rewriting had begun exactly on schedule. What did you say? This isn't about that. It became about that when you said I walked out like nobody asked me to leave. You did walk out, after you told me to step out of the photo, because you had been acting like you were too good for everyone all afternoon. There it was. The justification. My refusal had become attitude. My boundary had become arrogance. The consequence had become my fault. Dad, my clinic name comes off the sales materials. Silence. Then, no. The word was so automatic I almost missed what it revealed. Not, let's talk about it. Not, why? No. As if he were denying a request about his property. You don't have permission to use it that way. You gave permission every time you worked with this farm. No, I didn't. You can't suddenly rewrite history because you're angry. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm defining what my business is responsible for. If you embarrass this farm over some technical wording, don't expect to walk back in here like nothing happened. I looked down at the old draft. 3 years of my name, helping him sell confidence. 7 months since I explicitly told them not to overstate my role. 2 days since he told me I did not belong in the family photograph, and he still believed access to the farm was the thing I would trade myself to keep. Then I guess you should decide which matters more, I said. Having me as a daughter or having my name on your brochure? He hung up. My hand remained around the phone for several seconds. The call had changed something. Not in him. In me. Until that conversation, a small part of me had still been trying to prove the wording was objectively wrong enough for Dad to understand. Now I understood the real problem. He did not need to agree that my boundary was reasonable. He only needed to know it was mine. And he already did. That afternoon, Aunt Susan texted me. Your mom said you left Thanksgiving early. Everything okay? I read it twice. Then another message arrived from a cousin. We missed you in the picture. Diane said you headed home before they took it. My stomach tightened. I opened social media. Mom had posted the photograph. Dad and Diane in the middle. Chloe, between them. Aunts, cousins, grandchildren, partners. Everyone arranged under the stone fireplace where I had spent Thanksgiving since childhood. The caption read, Another Bennett Thanksgiving in the books. So grateful for the family who keeps showing up year after year. Keeps showing up. My thumb hovered over the comment field. For about 10 seconds, I imagined typing exactly what had happened. Dad ordered me out. Mom said she did not want people thinking I was part of the family. Chloe smiled. I could have corrected the story in one paragraph. Maybe people would have believed me. Maybe they would not. More importantly, nothing about that post changed what I needed to do next. So I took screenshots. Saved the date. Closed the app. The similarity bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Dad had used broad wording in sales packets because broad wording benefited him. Mom had used broad wording about Thanksgiving because broad wording benefited her. Nobody said Mara was thrown out of the picture. Nobody said Mara voluntarily left before the picture. Just enough ambiguity for everyone else to assume the version that made the Bennetts look whole. The same trick. Different audience. By Monday morning, I knew what I needed to change. Not their story about Thanksgiving. My professional exposure. A blank document sat on my office screen while I typed a notice to Bennett Ridge Farm. The first draft was angry. I deleted half of it. The second sounded defensive. Deleted again. By the third version, the emotion was gone. That was the one I trusted. Bennett Equine Veterinary Services had provided veterinary care to individual horses at Bennett Ridge Farm on a case-by-case basis. The practice had no agreement to provide continuous oversight of the farm's entire breeding program. The Bennett Equine name and logo could not be used in future promotional or sales materials without written authorization. Any future examinations, record reviews, consultations, or certifications would need to be scheduled and documented through the clinic. No accusations. No Thanksgiving. No mention of Chloe. No claim I couldn't support. Nathan happened to stop by my office while I was rereading it. Can I ask you something? He leaned against the doorframe. Sure. I turned the monitor enough for him to see. Read this as if you know none of the people involved. His eyes moved over the page. He didn't tell me what to do. That mattered. After a minute, he tapped one sentence. Can you support has never provided ongoing supervision? I considered it. There had been periods when my clinic handled enough cases that someone might argue the phrase was too broad. No, then narrow it. I changed the sentence to, Bennett Equine Veterinary Services does not currently have, and has not been authorized under, an agreement for continuous program-wide veterinary oversight of Bennett Ridge Farm. Nathan read it again. Can you support that? Yes. Then that's what you know. Nothing more. No speech about standing up to my father. No offer to call anyone. He left for his next appointment. The decision stayed mine. At 12:14, I signed the notice. At 12:16, I emailed it to Dad and Chloe. My finger rested over the send button for several seconds before I pressed it. That was the moment the situation truly changed. Until then, Dad could tell himself I was upset. Chloe could tell herself I would cool down. Mom could tell relatives I had left Thanksgiving early. A written business boundary was harder to wait out. Less than an hour later, Chloe asked to meet. We chose a coffee shop halfway between my clinic and the farm. She was already seated when I arrived. No makeup, hair pulled back. For once, nothing about her looked prepared for an audience. The empty chair across from her scraped the floor as I pulled it out. You sent Dad a cease and desist? She asked. No, that's what he's calling it. It's a notice about use of my clinic name. He's furious. I know. Caroline still hasn't released the deposit. I know that too. Chloe wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You have any idea what happens if this drags into next week? What? We have year-end expenses, payroll, feed contracts, Christmas bonuses. There were people on that farm who had nothing to do with this. Grooms, barn staff, office workers, people who had worked for Dad for years. That mattered. It just didn't mean my signature became the solution. Then Caroline needs accurate information quickly. She wants you. She wants independent confirmation. Same difference. No. Chloe looked away. You always have to make that distinction. Because there is one. Her jaw worked once before she spoke. Dad told me you always come around. The words sat between us. When? Every time I worried you'd be mad about something. My fingers curled around my cup. What did you worry I'd be mad about? The brochures, calls, sending people to you, whatever. And that was enough? What was I supposed to do? Fight him over every sentence? You could have listened when I said no. I did listen. You acknowledged the email and kept using the wording. He told me it was fine. And you chose his answer over mine about my own clinic. Her gaze lifted to mine. There was hurt there, maybe anger. I couldn't tell which mattered more. If this deal falls apart, she said, everyone will blame me. Why? Because I handle sales. Then tell the truth about who approved the wording. Her eyes narrowed. You want me to throw Dad under the bus? No. I want you to stop asking me to crawl under it instead. Neither of us spoke. A grinder screamed behind the coffee counter. Someone laughed near the entrance. Ordinary life continued around us, while my sister stared at me as if I had changed languages. Finally, she said, what would you actually do if Caroline asked you directly? Tell her exactly what my clinic did. And the rest? I'd tell her to get independent examinations for anything outside my scope. That could cost Dad thousands. Yes. You can say that like it's nothing? No. I leaned forward. It isn't nothing. Employees matter. The horses matter. The deal matters. But none of that makes a false impression accurate. You don't even know that anyone thinks it's false. Caroline called me because she thought I supervised the program. Chloe's face tightened. That fact had nowhere to go. The easiest thing, I continued, would be for me to sign, let the sale close and promise myself this is the last time. She didn't answer. You know why that doesn't work? Her eyes dropped to the table. Because there's always another last time. The words came out before I realized how true they were. Chloe rubbed her thumb along the cardboard sleeve around her coffee. I didn't think Dad was lying. I didn't say he was lying. What do you call it? I call it making a claim broad enough that buyers are hearing something I never agreed to provide. She looked up. That sounds like lawyer language. It's veterinarian language. For the first time, a tired little laugh escaped her. It disappeared quickly. What happens now? I verify what I can. And then, the consequences belong where the decisions were made. She flinched. Maybe because she understood. That included her. Maybe not. I had stopped trying to decide what other people felt before they showed me. We left without hugging. That hurt more than I expected. At the clinic, the afternoon passed in ordinary work. A gelding with a hoof abscess. A mare needing follow-up imaging. 2 phone calls. 1 medical record I rewrote because the first version implied more certainty than the exam supported. Just before closing, an email notification appeared. From Dad. The subject line was, "Stop this now." My pulse slowed rather than quickened. I opened it. The first paragraph accused me of damaging the farm over a personal disagreement. The second said Bennett Ridge had never misrepresented my qualifications. The third was where he made his mistake. The buyers have always been told, you handle our veterinary program because you have handled our veterinary program for years. Don't suddenly pretend you haven't been involved just because you're angry with us. Caroline expects your confirmation because that is what our buyers have always expected. Sign the statement and we can put this behind us. I read the paragraph again, then again. The buyers have always been told. Our buyers have always expected. Not Chloe. Not one brochure. Not one misunderstanding. Dad had written the pattern himself. More important, he had written it after receiving my formal notice. My phone rang almost immediately. Mom. I let it ring. Then Chloe. That one I let ring too. There was nothing either of them could say that would change the words on the screen. For years, Dad had treated my reliability as evidence that he had permission. Every emergency I answered. Every record I reviewed. Every quick question. Every favor. In his mind, repetition had become ownership. He thought the email proved I was being inconsistent. Instead, it proved something I had spent 3 days trying not to believe. My father had known exactly how valuable my professional credibility was. He had known I objected to the way he used it. And he had decided my objection mattered less than what my name could do for his farm. Dad's email stayed open on my screen until the letters blurred together. The buyers have always been told. Our buyers have always expected. He had written those lines as if repetition converted assumption into permission. A decade of favors had become evidence, in his mind, that my name belonged wherever he needed it. My phone lit again. Chloe. Then Mom. Then Chloe, a second time. I turned the phone face down. For the first time since Thanksgiving, there was nothing left to investigate about intent. Dad had answered that question himself. What remained was harder. What was I willing to do with the truth? The clinic was nearly empty by then. One technician was finishing medication logs in the back, and the cleaning crew had started in reception. Through my office wall came the muted scrape of a mop bucket rolling across tile. Normal sounds. They helped. I saved Dad's email as a PDF, printed a copy, and placed it with the others. Then I opened a blank spreadsheet, not because I planned to send it anywhere. Because whenever facts became emotional, structure helped me see them clearly. Across the top, I typed 4 headings. Date. What my clinic actually did. What Bennett Ridge represented. What I had already told them. The first row was easy. 3 years ago. Old sales packet. My clinic had treated individual horses. The farm used the phrase veterinary oversight. Dad had commented that buyers liked knowing I was behind the program. Next row. 7 months ago. Chloe asked whether they could say every horse was under my oversight. I said no. She forwarded that answer to Dad. Next. Current sales packet. My logo. Continuous veterinary oversight. Then my formal notice. Then Dad's email. The pattern looked almost embarrassingly simple once it was placed in columns. No secret account. No forged signature. No dramatic hidden document. Just people who had learned that I usually corrected their messes before consequences became expensive. The next morning, at 7:23, Chloe called. This time, I answered because her first sentence was not about Caroline. Magnolia isn't right. My chair moved back before I consciously decided to stand. What's happening? She keeps looking at her side. She pawed twice. Dad walked her and she settled, then started again. Has she passed manure? Yes, but not since early morning. Water. A little. Gums? I don't know. Get someone to check. A muffled conversation followed on her end. Then Chloe came back. Pink. Temperature? 100.2. Heart rate? Another pause. Dad's getting it. This was different from Mom arriving at my clinic with a paperwork deadline disguised as concern. This was an animal. And whatever else had happened between us, Magnolia did not know there was a fight. Call the on-call line, I said. Tell them exactly what you told me. Don't wait for me personally. You're not coming? If I'm the veterinarian assigned through the clinic, I'll come. If another doctor is closer, they'll go. Mara, call the line. Dad wants you. I'm not treating a horse based on what Dad wants. Her breath hit the microphone. Fine. The call ended. Less than 10 minutes later, our service rang me because I was, in fact, the closest available veterinarian. So I went. That decision irritated me more than it should have. Not because Magnolia needed care, because I knew how Dad would interpret my arrival. Sure enough, the moment my truck rolled into Bennett Ridge, he was standing by the barn entrance with his arms crossed. He didn't say hello. Thought you weren't our vet anymore. I stepped down with my bag. I said you don't have continuous program-wide oversight through my clinic. Looks like veterinary work to me. It is. For one patient. His mouth tightened. Chloe appeared from the aisle. Mara, please. That was enough. I walked past Dad. Magnolia stood in her stall, shifting her weight, looking toward her flank. Nothing about the scene suggested immediate catastrophe, but she was uncomfortable enough that paperwork could wait and resentment could wait even longer. Work narrowed the world. Listen. Observe. Examine. Ask what changed. Check what could be measured. For 20 minutes, nobody was my father or my sister. They were people answering questions about a patient. That was a relief. When I finished the initial assessment, I explained what I knew and what I didn't. She's uncomfortable. But right now, I'm not seeing signs that justify pretending I know more than I do. We'll treat what we can support, monitor her closely, and reassess if anything changes. Chloe nodded immediately. Dad said, so she's fine. No. He looked annoyed. I just heard you say. You heard me say I'm not seeing certain warning signs right now. That is not the same as fine. His expression changed in the familiar way it always did when I corrected one of his summaries. There it was again. Wording. Except, standing beside Magnolia, the reason for wording was impossible to dismiss. Precision protected patients. It also protected people. After arranging, monitoring, and follow-up through the clinic, I packed my equipment. Dad followed me toward the barn door. You came. I stopped. Yes. So all this nonsense about not being involved. Treating Magnolia does not make me supervisor of your breeding program. You can't split hairs forever. This isn't splitting hairs. It's the same farm. It is not the same responsibility. His jaw moved. You really think buyers care about that distinction? Yes. And if they don't? I still do. For one moment, neither of us moved. Then, he gave a short shake of his head. You always have to make everything harder than it needs to be. The sentence followed me all the way to my truck. Maybe because I finally understood what it meant. Harder for whom? By the time I returned to the clinic, Nathan was finishing a follow-up exam. He found me in the break room 20 minutes later, standing at the counter with coffee I had forgotten to drink. How's the mare? Stable for now. We're monitoring. He nodded, then glanced at my face. That's not what you're thinking about. A humorless laugh escaped me. Apparently I can treat one horse and still be accused of proving Dad was right about everything. Nathan opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and leaned against the opposite counter. About what? That I'm involved. That because I've helped for years, he's entitled to describe that however he wants. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Good. People in my life had spent too much time answering questions I had not actually finished asking. What's bothering you most? He said. The truth came out before I could polish it. I feel like I'm letting him fail. There. Not the clinic. Not the buyer. Him. Nathan turned the bottle once between his hands. What exactly are you responsible for? I looked at him. That sounds like something I would ask a client. Then answer it like one. My first instinct was irritation. The second was recognition. I looked down at the counter. I'm responsible for the accuracy of my records. He nodded once. For care I personally provide or appropriately supervise. Another nod. For what my practice represents. And for correcting something if I know my name is being used to imply more than that. The words came slower after that. I'm responsible for not withholding necessary care from an animal because I'm angry with the owner. Nathan said nothing. I am not responsible for protecting a commercial deadline created by paperwork I didn't approve. There it was. Said out loud. Clean enough that I could hear the difference. Nathan took a sip of water. Sounds like you know. He left a few minutes later. No command. No grand advice. Just a question. The rest was mine. Back in my office, I returned to the spreadsheet. The rose looked different after Magnolia. Until that morning, part of me had feared that stepping back from Bennett Ridge meant becoming the person Dad accused me of being. Uncaring. Tree-heed. Punitive. But Magnolia had needed veterinary care, and she had received veterinary care. The sale needed something else. It needed my professional reputation to behave like a blank check. Those were not the same thing. That afternoon, Mom came to the clinic. She had not texted first. The receptionist appeared at my office door. Your mother's here. Did she say why? She said it's personal. Of course she did. Diane was waiting in an empty consultation room when I walked in. She wore the navy coat she saved for church and donor dinners. Her handbag rested in her lap. For a few seconds, she looked older than she had at Thanksgiving. Not fragile, just tired. Is Magnolia okay? She asked. We're monitoring her. Chloe has the instructions. Thank you for going. She needed a veterinarian. Mom's eyes dropped briefly. Then she folded her hands. Your father is furious. That seems to be his normal state around me lately. Mara. What? I didn't come here to fight. Neither had she come to apologize. At least not yet. She drew a breath. We all said things on Thanksgiving. I said congratulations. You know what I mean. No. I know what Dad said. I know what you said. Her lips pressed together. That photograph has gotten completely out of proportion. The phrase caught me. The photograph. As if the picture itself were the problem. Has it? Yes. Chloe says people are asking questions. Susan apparently contacted you. Your father thinks you're making the whole thing public. I haven't posted anything. Then good. Let's keep it that way. A familiar little pressure started behind my eyes. Mom continued. Your father is willing to put this behind him. How generous. Mara, please. I waited. She reached into her purse and took out her phone. On the screen was a photograph from Thanksgiving. Not the one she had posted. A different frame, from the same series. There was a gap near the edge where someone could easily have fit. You can come over Sunday, she said. We'll take another one. For a moment, I genuinely didn't understand. Another what? Photograph. I stared at her. We'll have Chloe come. Your father will stand with you. We can put it online and stop all this nonsense. Something inside me went very quiet. What does that have to do with the sales packet? Her eyes flickered. There's no reason to keep mixing everything together. You're the one mixing it together. I am trying to fix Thanksgiving. No, you're offering to return something you had no right to take. Her expression tightened. We're trying, Mara. What happens after the picture? She hesitated. There. Not long. Long enough. I leaned back. What do you want me to sign? Mom's face changed. Caroline just needs reassurance. What reassurance? That the farm has always had proper veterinary support. That sentence is too broad. She just needs to know nothing improper happened. That isn't something I can certify. You know your father takes good care of those horses. This is not about whether Dad cares about horses. Then what is it about? My name. She frowned. You're willing to tear this family apart over your name? The irony would have been funny if it had not been so precise. You told me not to stand in a family photograph. That was one terrible moment. And 48 hours later you were at my door asking for my professional signature. She opened her mouth. I kept going. You still think the picture is what I want back? Mom went still. Then what do you want? The answer was on my desk. In every record, every email, every sentence I had spent years being mocked for making too exact. For my name to mean what I say it means. Mom stared at me. That's what this is about. Yes. No, it isn't. Her voice sharpened. This is about punishing your father. If I wanted to punish him, I'd be looking for something to hurt him with. I'm not. I'm refusing to say something I can't support. He could lose thousands. I know. People work there. I know. Chloe built her life there. I know. And none of that matters? It matters enough that I'm not asking Caroline to cancel anything. That stopped her. What? I'm not telling the buyer to walk away. Then what are you doing? Giving her the truth. Mom's hands tightened around the phone. What truth? The scope of what my clinic actually did. For the first time since she arrived, she seemed to understand I had already moved past the argument she came prepared to have. She stood. If you do this, your father may never forgive you. The sentence found the oldest part of me. The girl holding Chloe's shoes. The daughter who never wanted anyone forced to choose. The woman who still checked her phone after Thanksgiving hoping her mother might say, "We shouldn't have done that." For a second, I could feel every version of myself that had been trained to prevent this exact outcome. Dad angry. Mom disappointed. Chloe frightened. Me fixing it. Again. Then I thought about the spreadsheet. The difference between treatment and oversight. Care and obligation. Love and permission. If that's his choice, I said. I can't make it for him. Mom left without the new photograph being discussed again. The room seemed larger after she was gone. My hands shook for nearly a minute. Then they stopped. At my desk, I opened a new document. Not the notice I had already sent to the farm. This one was for Caroline. The first version was too long. The second sounded like I was trying to prove Dad dishonest. That wasn't my job either. By the third draft, the statement had become what it needed to be. Factual. Limited. Boring. Almost. Bennett Equine Veterinary Services had provided care to identified horses on identified dates. The clinic had performed certain reproductive, routine, and emergency services. There was no agreement under which the practice provided continuous program-wide oversight of Bennett Ridge Farm. The current marketing language had not been authorized by me. For horses outside the scope of my records, an independent veterinarian should perform whatever examinations the buyer considered necessary. That was all. No Thanksgiving. No accusation. No speculation about what Dad meant. Facts did not need my anger to carry them. Still, before sending it, I printed the spreadsheet and checked every sentence against a source. Clinic logs. Invoices. Chloe's old email. My reply. The forwarded message to Dad. The older sales packet. His comment. The current brochure. My formal notice. Then his fatal email. Date by date. Claim by claim. At 4:30, Nathan passed my office. Got a minute? He stepped inside. I handed him the statement. Same rule as before. Tell me if I'm claiming more than I can prove. He read it. Once. Then again. One finger paused on a sentence. This says you never provided full program supervision. Correct. Could someone argue that the volume of work looked like supervision? Yes. Then make the sentence about whether there was an agreement and what you were authorized to represent. I nodded. That was fair. The wording changed. Not because Nathan was rescuing me. Because professional accuracy mattered even when it made my position slightly less dramatic. Especially then. When he finished, he handed the page back. You're not asking the buyer to do anything. No. You're just defining what your practice did. Yes. He gave the smallest nod. Then decide whether you're ready to own that. After he left, I sat alone with the document. Ready was not the word. There was no readiness. Only choice. Sending the statement could cost Dad money. Not because I was lying. Because independent exams cost money. Delays cost money. Trust, once questioned, cost money. For years, the cheaper option had been Mara. Mara would look. Mara would sign. Mara would explain. Mara would fix. The cost had always existed. I had simply been absorbing it. At 5:12, I attached the statement to an email addressed to Caroline Whitaker. I copied Chloe and Dad. The subject line was plain: clarification of veterinary services. My finger hovered over send. Thanksgiving flashed through my mind. Not the whole evening, only Dad's hand pointing past the camera. Step out. Then Mom, at my clinic, holding up the replacement photograph like a bargaining chip. I clicked send. Nothing happened for several seconds. No thunder. No sudden relief. Just a small notification confirming delivery. Then I sat back. The power shift was almost invisible. Dad still owned Bennett Ridge. Chloe still ran sales. Mom could still tell relatives whatever story made her comfortable. But from that moment forward, none of them controlled what my professional name meant. Caroline replied 43 minutes later. Her message was measured. She thanked me for the clarification and said she was not terminating the transaction at that time. Instead, several horses would require independent examinations and a review of representations in the sales materials before the deal proceeded. Some terms might need to be revisited depending on the results. That was it. No dramatic condemnation. No promise to destroy Bennett Ridge. A buyer protecting her own interests. Exactly what I had expected. Exactly what Dad had wanted to avoid. My phone rang before I finished reading. His name filled the screen. This time, I answered. What the hell did you send her? My statement. You made it sound like we lied. I described what my clinic did. You told her you didn't oversee the program. I didn't. You were out here this morning treating Magnolia. One patient. Don't start that again. It matters. She's ordering independent exams on half the package. That's her decision. Do you know what that costs? Yes. You cost this farm thousands of dollars today. The old reflex rose. Explain. Soften. Make him see that I had not intended harm. Then another sentence came instead. No. Accuracy costs money when you've been getting it free. Nothing came through the phone for several seconds. When Dad spoke again, his voice was lower. You think you're clever? No. You think because you have that clinic, you're above us? No. You embarrass me in front of a buyer. You drag your mother through Thanksgiving. You turn Chloe into a nervous wreck, and somehow you're the victim. I didn't send Caroline anything about Thanksgiving. That's not the point. It is to me. You retract that statement. No. Mara. No. The word came easier the second time. His breathing grew louder. If you don't send her a correction tonight, don't come back to this farm. The threat landed differently now. Weeks earlier, maybe even days earlier, it would have cracked something open inside me. Home. Childhood. Christmas mornings. My first pony. Dad teaching me how to wrap a leg when I was 12. Every good memory attached to those acres. He knew the weight of that place. Maybe that was why he had always assumed I would pay almost any price to keep access to it. I looked through my office window. The clinic parking lot was nearly empty. My truck sat under the security light. A technician crossed toward her car, laughing at something on her phone. A place I had built without asking Dad where I was allowed to stand. Then stop calling me when you need the daughter you just banned. He hung up. The screen went dark. For 39 years, every serious boundary I had tried to set with my parents ended the same way. I explained. They argued. I explained more carefully. They got hurt. I apologized for how I said it. Eventually, the original boundary disappeared under all the explaining. My thumb moved toward Dad's name. One more message could clarify. One more paragraph could tell him I still loved him. One more explanation could make sure he understood I wasn't trying to destroy anything. Then, I put the phone down. For once, I let the silence stand. The first real consequence arrived on Wednesday morning. Not as an apology. Not as a threat. As an email from Caroline Whitaker. I read it standing beside the exam room counter while one of my technicians prepared supplies for the next appointment. Caroline wrote that the independent examinations had been completed on 4 of the horses in the package. Nothing catastrophic had been found. 2 required additional records before she was comfortable proceeding. 1 would need a repeat evaluation before shipping. The representations in the original sales packet were being revised, and the price structure was under discussion. The transaction was still alive. Just more expensive now. More complicated. Slower. Accurate. For several seconds, I stared at the message. Some part of me had expected a larger explosion. Dad had talked as though my statement would destroy Bennett Ridge. Mom had talked as though employees would be standing outside locked barns by Christmas. Chloe had made the entire transaction sound one phone call away from collapse. Instead, reality did what reality usually does. It sent invoices. Independent examinations cost money. Delays cost money. Revised transportation dates cost money. A buyer who no longer accepted broad language at face value asked more questions. Nothing dramatic happened. That almost made the lesson clearer. The farm had not been depending on a lie big enough to make headlines. It had been depending on ambiguity, cheap enough to save money. And for years, I had been part of what made that ambiguity cheap. My phone vibrated against the counter. A message from Chloe. "Can you call me when you have a minute?" The phrase would have been funny if it hadn't carried so much history. Quick question. 5 minutes. When you have a minute. I finished the appointment before calling back. Chloe answered immediately. "They're making us redo the veterinary section of every active sales packet." "Okay. That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say?" A drawer slammed faintly on her end. "They want written records for everything now." "That's reasonable." "Dad doesn't think so." I assumed. "He says Caroline poisoned the well." Caroline asked questions. Same result. "No." A tired breath came through the phone. "Fine. Whatever. I didn't call to argue about Caroline." "What did you call about?" "We need ongoing coverage." I waited. "We need an actual agreement with a veterinary practice," she continued. "Something formal." There was a trace of embarrassment in the last word. Formal. The thing Dad had spent years mocking. "What do you need from me?" "Names." That surprised me. Not because I couldn't provide them. Because the old Chloe would have asked me to handle it. Call somebody. Explain the farm. Get a discount. Smooth the transition. Instead, she had asked for names. "I can send you the public contact information for a few practices that handle breeding operations. Can you tell them we're good for it?" "No." Another breath. "Can you at least tell them we're not a nightmare?" "You want me to lie already?" A small sound escaped her. Almost a laugh. "Okay, fair." I opened a blank email. "I'll send you contact information. You negotiate scope and pricing directly. What should we expect it to cost?" "That depends on what you ask them to do." "Dad thinks we were already paying enough." My eyes moved to the clinic billing screen. For years, Bennett Ridge had paid invoices. That was true. But not for everything. Not for late-night texts. Not for reviewing Chloe's sales language. Not for the calls Dad made from his truck. Not for the time spent telling a buyer what a record meant because nobody at the farm wanted to explain it. Not for the questions that supposedly took 30 seconds. "You weren't paying for everything you were receiving," I said. Chloe went quiet. "We didn't know." "You didn't ask." "We thought you were helping." I was. "So now you're saying we should have been paying you?" "I'm saying helping became part of the operating model." The words sounded blunt, even to me. But they were true. "You know what Dad said when I showed him the proposals?" Chloe asked. "What?" "He said no veterinarian is worth that much." My mouth almost curved. "And what did you say?" Another pause. That apparently one was. That landed somewhere I wasn't prepared for. Not an apology. Not redemption. Just acknowledgement. A small one. Maybe the first. "Send me the names," Chloe said. "I will." "And Mara?" "Yes?" "I know this doesn't fix anything." The room around me seemed to narrow. "No," I said. "It doesn't." She didn't argue. That mattered more than I wanted it to. After we hung up, I sent 3 contacts. No recommendations beyond their published services. No private introductions. No message explaining that Bennett Ridge was important. No request for special treatment. Then I closed the email. For once, their next step did not require mine. The following Friday, Dad came to the clinic. Reception called before letting him past the front desk. "Your father is here. Does he have an appointment?" "No. Ask what he needs." A minute later, the receptionist came back on the line. "He says it's personal." Of course it was. I told her to send him to the small consultation room near the entrance. Neutral ground. No treatment equipment. No desk he could stand behind and pretend belonged to him. Dad was still wearing his farm jacket when I walked in. Mud dried along the edge of one boot. He looked tired. Not destroyed. Not humbled beyond recognition. Just like a man who had been getting fewer easy answers than usual. "You look busy," he said. "I am." He nodded toward the chair across from him. I stayed standing. "What do you need?" His eyes lifted. "Your mother wants you at Christmas." That was not what he had come for. I knew it before he continued. "She thinks Thanksgiving went too far. She participated. She regrets that. Did she ask you to tell me that?" His mouth tightened. "You always have to cross-examine every sentence." "No. I just want to know whose apology I'm hearing." "This is exactly what I mean." I waited. Dad leaned back. "Fine. We handled Thanksgiving badly." "Handled badly." Not I told you that you weren't part of the family, but it was closer than he had come before. "You can come Christmas Eve," he said. "Your mother wants everyone there." "Everyone?" His expression sharpened slightly. "Don't start. I'm not starting anything. We'll put all this behind us." There it was again. A phrase that sounded generous until I asked what it required. "What does putting it behind us mean?" "It means you stop making this bigger." My stomach tightened. "How?" Caroline is still asking questions. "She's finishing her review. She's renegotiating." "Yes. Because of the statement you sent. Because the original materials created an impression she wanted verified. You can fix that." "No. You haven't even heard what I'm asking." "I have a pretty good idea." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not a contract. Not anything formal. A draft email. My name was already typed into the signature line. Of course it was. The text described the dispute as a misunderstanding over terminology and said Bennett Equine had maintained a long-standing professional relationship with Bennett Ridge that could reasonably be described as ongoing support. Reasonably. Ongoing support. Every word had been chosen to sound harmless. "Send that," Dad said. "She'll understand." I read it twice, then handed it back. Which sentence in my statement was inaccurate? His face changed. "What?" "My statement to Caroline." "Which sentence was wrong?" "That's not the issue. It is if you want me to correct it." "You made things sound worse than they were." "That's not a factual error." "Mar, tell me what I got wrong." He tapped the paper with one finger. "You made it sound like we used your name without your involvement." "You did. You were involved. In specific cases." "There you go again. Dad, you still haven't pointed to anything false." His chair scraped backward as he stood. "Do you have any idea what this has cost us?" "Yes." "No, you don't." "I know independent exams cost money. I know the sale was delayed. I know some terms are being renegotiated. You know what I mean?" "I do." That made him angrier, because the real answer was not a number. The real cost was losing convenience. Losing the assumption that my credibility automatically followed the Bennett name wherever he put it. His shoulders rose with a hard breath. "Your mother is trying to give you a way back." The sentence came so plainly I almost missed the insult inside it. A way back? To the family. Thanksgiving returned in one flash. Not the whole room. Just Dad's finger pointing away from the camera. Step out. 48 hours later, the same man had stood at my dining table, asking for my signature. Now he was offering belonging again. For a correction he could not prove I needed to make. "You told me I wasn't family enough for a photograph," I said. Dad looked toward the door. "Here we go. 48 hours later, you needed my name badly enough to come to my house. That's not. You don't get to erase me when I'm inconvenient and keep my credentials when they make you money." His gaze snapped back to mine. "I raised you." "Yes. Paid for half your schooling. You helped. Gave you your first horse. Let you work this farm. Introduced you to half the people who became your clients." Some of that was true. My father had given me things. Taught me things. Opened doors. Love did not become imaginary simply because control had grown around it. But gifts were not ownership papers. "You raised me," I said. "You did not license me." His face went still. For several seconds, all I could hear was the muffled ringing of the clinic phone outside. Then Dad folded the draft email in half. "You really want to throw away your own parents over this?" The old version of me would have answered that question for 20 minutes. I would have explained that I didn't want to throw anyone away, that I loved them, that I wanted a relationship, that this hurt me too, that I wasn't trying to punish anybody. Maybe I would have made the explanation beautiful enough for him to forgive my boundary. Instead, I said, I want a relationship that doesn't require me to sign things to keep it. He stared at me. I'm not sending that correction. His jaw tightened. Then don't expect me to pretend everything's fine. I'm not asking you to. The paper disappeared into his jacket. What happens when the farm stops calling you? The question was meant to hurt. It did. Just not the way he expected. Then the farm stops calling me. His eyes narrowed. You think you won? No. I meant it. Winning had stopped being the right word. I hadn't taken Bennett Ridge. Hadn't ruined Chloe. Hadn't humiliated Dad in front of the county. The horses were still there. The barns were still standing. The farm would keep operating if Grant adapted. What had changed was smaller and bigger at the same time. My availability was no longer an entitlement. Dad walked out without saying goodbye. I stayed in the consultation room after the door shut. My hands shook. That part hadn't magically gone away. Neither had grief. Boundaries did not turn me into stone. They simply stopped grief from making decisions for me. 3 days later, Mom texted, Your father says you refuse to clear this up. Family shouldn't end over paperwork. The message sat on my screen while I ate lunch at my desk. For once, I didn't draft 7 responses. Only one. It didn't end over paperwork. The paperwork showed me what the relationship had become. I sent it. Mom replied 20 minutes later. I hope someday you realize how much this is hurting us. No question about how Thanksgiving had hurt me. No acknowledgement of the clinic. Nothing new. So I didn't answer. Low contact did not arrive with an announcement. It looked like that. One unanswered message. Then another request redirected to the clinic. A Sunday invitation I declined without explaining why for 6 paragraphs. Christmas Eve passed without me at Bennett Ridge. That hurt too. Around 6 that evening, I caught myself wondering what Mom had cooked. Whether Dad was carving the turkey. Whether Chloe had worn the green dress she always wore at Christmas. Missing them did not mean the boundary was wrong. That was one of the hardest things I learned. A feeling can be real without becoming an instruction. Chloe asked me to coffee in January. Not at the farm. Not at the clinic. The same coffee shop where we had spoken before I sent Caroline the clarification. She arrived early again. This time there was no sales packet on the table. I signed a contract with a new practice, she said after we sat down. How's it going? Expensive. A small smile passed between us. Dad hates it. I assumed. They charge for phone consults after a certain point. That happens. They want every certification request submitted ahead of time. Also happens. He keeps saying nobody used to make him do all this. There was no reason to answer that. Chloe stared into her coffee. After a while, she said, I should have listened to you. The sentence was quiet enough that I almost asked her to repeat it. But I had heard, about the brochures? About more than that. Her fingers tightened around the cup. When you sent that email 7 months ago, I knew what you meant. My chest tightened. Then why did you keep using the wording? Dad said you'd get over it. And that was enough? At the time. She looked at me. I told myself you were being dramatic because that was easier than telling him no. There it was. Not innocence. Not a misunderstanding. A choice. I'm sorry, Chloe said. The word did not erase anything. I was surprised by how little I wanted it to. Apologies used to feel like the prize. Now they felt more like information. What happened after them mattered more. I'm not ready to go back to normal, I said. Her mouth tightened. Then she nodded. Okay. No work favors. Okay. No messages through Mom or Dad. Okay. If you want a relationship with me, it has to exist without the farm in the middle. She looked down for a second. I don't know what that looks like. Neither do I. That was the most honest place we had ever started. By early spring, Caroline's purchase had closed under revised terms. She told me in a brief email, after requesting final copies of the records my clinic actually held. Some horses stayed in the package. One did not. The farm absorbed additional examination and administrative costs. Nothing about the outcome resembled the disaster Dad had predicted. Bennett Ridge survived. It simply had to pay for professional certainty instead of borrowing mine. My own life became quieter. No late-night photographs from Chloe with the words, "quick opinion." No messages from Dad asking me to stop by while I was in the area. No sales packets appearing beside my Thanksgiving plate. At first, that quiet felt like rejection. Then it started feeling like time. Time to finish work and leave work. Time to have dinner without checking whether Bennett Ridge needed something. Time to discover that being unavailable to solve somebody else's problem did not make me unnecessary as a person. Several months after Thanksgiving, the clinic marked its anniversary. Nothing extravagant. A catered dinner after closing. Cupcakes from the bakery down the street. Nathan made a terrible speech about how many coffee machines we had destroyed over the years. Someone found photographs from our first cramped office, when half the furniture had been second-hand and the waiting room chairs didn't match. Near the end of the evening, one of our technicians lifted her phone. Picture before everybody leaves. People gathered near the reception desk. My first instinct was to move toward the edge. It happened so automatically I almost laughed. Nathan stood near the back. Two technicians crouched in front. Someone called my name. "Mara, where do you want to stand?" The room disappeared for half a second. Thanksgiving. Dad's hand. The fireplace. Chloe, between my parents. The glass in my fingers. Step out of the photo. Then the memory passed. Nobody in front of me was pointing toward a door. Nobody was measuring how useful I had been that week before deciding whether I belonged in the frame. I walked into the group. Right into the middle. Not because the middle meant I had won. Not because center position proved my value. Because that happened to be where I wanted to stand. Someone complained that Nathan was too tall. Everyone shifted. A technician bumped my shoulder. Another person laughed. The camera clicked. Later that night, I sat alone in my office looking at the picture. There I was, 39 years old. Still my parents' daughter. Still Chloe's sister. Still capable of missing Bennett Ridge so sharply that some evenings I had to sit with the feeling until it passed. None of that had disappeared. What had disappeared was the bargain. For years, I had confused being useful with being wanted. The photograph didn't fix that. Walking away from the old bargain did. I closed the image and shut down my computer. This time, when the camera clicked, I hadn't wondered whether I was allowed to be in the frame.